Hello, lovely people, and welcome back. And today's guest is a man that I have had such respect for since I discovered him right at the beginning of my healing journey. And I knew when I had to heal that I had to start with diet and nutrition. And I grew up on a market garden. My dad was a grower. He started Pick Your Own Strawberries in the UK. And I was out on the fields, I think at about 6 years old, with a hot water bottle strapped to my front and back in January, and my little fingers planting lettuces, which I'm sure would be illegal now. But this man has done, I believe, more for farming than any other farmer, certainly in the UK and up there, absolutely globally. He was the founder of Riverford Organic Farms, and it is a huge honor to welcome Guy Singh-Watson. And I just want to quote before I introduce you, Guy, to say it's a quote in my book from the late, great Anita Roddick, who founded the Body Shop. And she said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. This man is a swarm of mosquitoes for the organic movement. Guy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you for that, Philly.
So, can you tell our audience a little bit about you, how you got into farming? I know you also started with a 5-acre plot. So, can you tell us about yourself?
Well, my parents were tenant farmers of the Church of England down in South Devon and had been since 1951. I grew up on the farm, always wanting to be a farmer. I mean, probably like you, I was, padding around in my wellies from when I could walk, and always following around and probably being a pain in the ass for my father. That's what I always wanted to do. I did flirt with other careers, but I think it was somehow inevitable that I would come back to the farm, which I did, having studied agriculture and then gone off and been a management consultant in London and New York, and pretty much hated it. I came back to the farm in the mid-80s and started growing organic vegetables, and that was 36 years ago. I don't know why. I mean, I suppose it was, I did, as you say, start on a very small scale. It was 3 acres with a wheelbarrow and a borrowed tractor, and delivering the vegetables out of my back of my car. It was very small scale.
So in the 1980s, we were going through a little bit of a kind of farming change in the UK. Okay, it was a time that Marks and Spencer's came into the food chain. And I know that my brother put a consortium of farmers, growers together for them. And when they came in, all of a sudden, food seemed to change in the supermarkets. And I know that a class A lettuce went from 4 ounces to 12 ounces in less than a year. It was kind of overnight. And that takes a shitload of chemicals. And so why, with all of that going on and everybody going, oh, I need to grow bigger and better, why did you choose organic farming?
A combination of factors. I mean, one was my brother had just been in hospital with paraquat poisoning. Paraquat is a herbicide. I had, suffered mild illness in my teens as a result of spraying, my father's barley and not really taking adequate precautions. Partly that, just not wanting to handle all these toxic chemicals, and the other was that I had spent the previous year in New York, and I spent a lot of time. There was a little farmers market on Union Square, and I used to go out and talk to the farmers there, and found that infinitely more interesting than anything I did, talking to clients and so on. And I suppose I had a sense that there was a growing market there. As a management consultant, we had been advising global companies on, how looking for new growth markets was normally the center of what we did. And when I got back to the farm, having realized that I couldn't do that management consultancy anymore, I kind of just talking to people locally. Totnes, South Devon is a very alternative area. I think I sensed that this was a, nascent, very small, but potentially high growth market. So it was a combination, not wanting to handle the chemicals, and sensing that maybe it was a growth market. And maybe there was subconsciously some desire to farm in a more environmentally friendly way. But I have to say, I have no memory of being conscious of that. I think that's my motivator now, but I think that's evolved over 35 years of having my hands in the soil and watching the wildlife around me and wanting to be part of it.
Yeah, it was a wise choice. My brother was dead from cancer within 2 years. And I used to watch him going up and down the fields, spraying, wearing a mask because the National Farmers Union, and don't get me started on them, told him to, but didn't tell him to put a T-shirt on, and the skin's the largest organ of the body. And so were all the other young farmers in our village.
Well, I mean, it was a long time ago. I hope I did escape the effects of these. But the terrible thing about, some of those, well, almost as you'll know, I mean, any experiment to do with diet and the environmental effect on us, it can take decades, maybe decades, for many decades for that to sort of play out. So it may catch up with me. Yeah, I used to take the nozzles off the sprayer and blow them out when they got blocked. I can't believe it. I mean, I just cannot believe that I was so stupid. But I don't know, when you're 18 or whatever, you think you're going to live forever, and that your body can take anything when you're in your 60s.
To give you hope, you've most probably got a stronger immune system than anybody else I know, because you've had your hands in organic soil for the last 38 years. So you're okay, Guy. You're not going anywhere. um, there is a massive connection between our health and the health of our soil. And we have seen the soil systematically killed off over the last 50, well, since really the war. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about the soil and the importance of the structure of the soil?
You spend yourself time walking around as an organic grower, constantly asking yourself, why does that lettuce look healthy and happy, and that one over there looks stunted? And then you develop theories about it. And the chemical farmer, it's all about, have I put the right soluble nutrients on in the form of chemical fertilizers? For us, I mean, I suppose as an organic farmer, with not having recourse to that, you sort of think, have I treated the soil right? I suppose initially it was largely physical things, cultivating the soil when it's too wet can be incredibly damaging, and just trying to adopt more benign cultivations, because I think as organic farmers, our great weakness, really, the weakest part of our story, is that we do cultivate the soil excessively, and we do that to get rid of weeds because we don't have chemicals to do that. And I think trying to develop ways of farming that involves less cultivation is very important. And I suppose, and then over the last, so it was just emerging, really, that you do some things, it works better, and cultivation was clearly a key part of that, adding lots of organic matter to the soil, keeping the soil covered. I learned that in my first season. The traditional thing was to plough in the winter, let the frosts and so on break down the tilth, and then sow your crops in the spring. That was an absolute disaster organically. The soil just sort of slumped, and I quickly became convinced that the key was to keep the ground covered at all times, wherever possible, with a living crop, and particularly in the winter, very high rainfall in Devon. So I was sort of forming all these just through sort of observation. And I remember, my father saying similar things, and some of the old boys on the farm talking in similar ways. So the generation of farmers that I grew up were, it was, as I say, it was all about a technologist advising you which chemicals to put on. And then I suppose over the last 10 years, I mean, the whole thing about, first it was our own biome in our gut, and then increasingly people starting to appreciate that actually the soil was, very similar as well. Just unbelievable biodiversity there, particularly in terms of mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria and so on, and the health of the soil in an organic system was completely dependent on the recycling of nutrients that was going on in that. And then again, that incredibly intimate relationship between the plant and the mycorrhiza that live around the plant's roots, and indeed even enter the roots, and the symbiotic relationship that they have. And then I suppose there are a couple of things. I remember listening to an expert in composting and soil carbon telling me that a mature tree, say an oak tree, will be putting out 50% of the sugars that it creates from photosynthesis, it uses to feed that community around its roots. It actually is exuding that into the soil, and it's doing that because it benefits from that symbiotic relation. And that really made me think. It's not quite as much in our crops, but it would be maybe 30%. And then I employed this crazy Bulgarian guy who had been working in the States for 10 years. And I'm rather ashamed to say now, at the age of 62, that I spent the first 25 years of my growing career being rather skeptical about compost and thinking, what's wrong with just well-rotted manure? That's what happens in nature. Animal has a poo, it falls on the ground, the soil deals with it. Why do we have to do all this composting? It just seemed crazy to me. But it's one of those things. I don't understand really why composting is so effective, but since employing this guy and him effectively running the farm that I now have with my wife Kitty, and his first thing was he wanted to set up a thing making compost, and I have to say that, and the crops that he grew on really pretty awful soil were better than anything I'd grown in the previous 25 years, and also much healthier. We had far fewer disease problems, and particularly with strawberries. And then when we delivered our vegetables to Riverford, the QC guys, quality control, who normally they're just ticking a box and weighing it, and occasionally they'll taste something, but they were saying that that everything tasted much better, particularly the strawberries. They were the ones that really stood out, that they were just way, way better than anything we got from anybody else. So I have then become, I suppose I've just left this guy to get on with it. I say he's got some sort of wisdom that I didn't have, and sometimes I think you do have to trust in things that you don't fully understand. If it works.
I love listening to you talk about compost, and I have done on many occasions. And I fell for your April Fool's joke. Was it last year or the year before, where you said you were selling your compost with your Riverford boxes? And I got so excited and I kept trying to order it and I couldn't. So eventually I phoned the farm and I said, listen, I've been trying for ages to. They went, yeah, it was an April Fool's. And I'm like, okay. But please, oh my God, I wish you'd sell it.
It was a little bizarre. I have to say that one wasn't my idea. I think it amused a few people.
So can you tell me the key to really good compost? I mean, I know that you've handed it over to somebody else, but.
Well, not really. But I can tell you what's worked for us. I mean, Milan, the guy who makes the compost, probably the best compost we had when we had access to some crab shells, when they picked the crabs, and we incorporated that into the compost. I'm afraid the Environment Agency have stopped us doing that. But a wide variety of sources is quite important. Obviously, everyone will say the right balance of carbon and nitrogen, the kind of brown stuff and the green stuff is important. And then the right level of oxygen in there, keeping it turning, trying to keep the clamp open. We achieve that by all the wooden boxes that come in the winter from Southern Europe. We don't even chip them or break them up. We did to start with. Now we don't even bother. We just chuck the whole box in and mix it up with all the vegetable waste, even the compostable bags that come back from customers. Some there's often soil going in there. There's wood chip coming from local contractors. Occasionally, if we're mowing off areas, some of the grass clippings might be a really good, mixture. And it was brilliant when it included some stuff from the sea. I mean, there is something about, I think it probably had all the micronutrients and in there. And then not trying to make it too fast. It almost, our compost, the problem is it almost gets too hot. I mean, it'll go up to over 70 degrees centigrade. You could cook a chicken. Yeah, it's turning it to try and stop it getting too hot. And then because the heat favors bacteria as it cools down over a long period, that tends to favor a fungal rich compost, which I think most people agree. It depends what you're using it for, but most people would agree is better. So not making it too quickly and then having a sort of maturation period at the end. But yeah, I'm not going to claim that I understand, how it works. I can say quite definitively that it does work in terms of, yield, quality, shelf life, flavor, disease resistance. It's definitely improved our farm. Even find we're not. I don't think we're suffering from drought as much. Maybe that's because the plants are rooting better. I set up an irrigation system on the farm, and we didn't even use it this summer, actually, mostly because we were just too lazy. Yeah, so and we did lose some crops. To be honest, we just got too lazy, and I've reached an age where I'm afraid I'm not going to sleep by the irrigation pump. I'm going to go to the beach. I mean, I'm just.
I don't blame you.
So I wasn't prepared to do it, and Milan went back to Bulgaria once the strawberries were finished, and yeah. But anyway, we didn't. It wasn't a disaster, and I think because we have very thin soils. I think in previous regimes we would have lost a lot more in terms of our crops. Yeah, so as I say, I'm very late to composting. Probably the first 2/3 of my growing career, I poo-pooed it, and I now am an absolute evangelist. And there's nothing more tedious than a convert, is there? So
no, I completely get it. I'm going to come back to the crab shells and the fact that you can't put them in the compost now from orders from the Environmental Agency, and they've stopped farmers using green manure as well. And everybody, there's this whole movement going on at the moment from people who all believe that we need to be vegan to save the planet. And I don't eat meat because my mum killed my pet pig when I was 6 years old because Snowy was on the sofa watching Blue Peter with me one too many times. And in all fairness to my mum, I'm a grower's daughter. She bought the pig to feed up and put in the freezer, but at 6, I hadn't quite got that. But I don't eat meat, but I buy your bones, your chicken bones from the farm, and I make bone broth. And I have a lot of bone broth so that I'm getting those nutrients into my body. And so when people say we should be vegan, could you just explain the biodiversity that animals on the land create, and the fact that if we aren't eating them, farmers will not be holding those animals?
I just recently finished reading George Monbiot's Regenesis, which many actually organic farmers, it's absolutely incensed, and I think he is unnecessarily condemning of the farming community. And it's quite an irritating book in some ways, but I think he's got much more right than he's got wrong. So I'm not going to condemn the vegan lobby. The world would be a better place if we were all vegan, actually. We cannot possibly, or certainly if we ate a hell of a lot less meat than we do globally, and particularly in wealthy nations. So
I think that's the key, is eating less. I think it's very good to have it in the diet, but we just
not a little bit
much.
less. We've got to eat really a lot. Yeah, So I think the average consumption is about 15 or 1600 grams a week in the UK. We got to cut that to a quarter. 400 grams. So we're talking big reductions if we're going to have enough land available. If we're going to grow food in a way that's respectful for nature and have some land left over for nature, the only way we're going to achieve that with 7 billion, probably peaking at 10 billion people in 2050 is to eat a lot less animal products, because it's the most ridiculously inefficient way of feeding ourselves. Having said that, I am not an advocate of large-scale rewilding. Been to the Napa State and seen other examples, and actually seen where we have anyway. Certainly, it's not going to save our environmental crisis anything like quickly enough, and I'm a bit sceptical about what it's going to deliver anyway in any sort of meaningful way. Certainly in the lowlands, I think there's a much stronger argument for it in upland Britain, where really the amount of food produced is absolutely minuscule. But on our land, it would be very, very difficult to farm without animals. I'm not going to say it would be impossible, but it would be very, very difficult. There is, we make compost, and there is no manure in it at all, and that's largely what we grow our crops on. We do occasionally, if we don't have enough compost, resort to using my brother's cow muck, but there wouldn't be enough compost to go round to grow all the crops that we need. So it'd be hard to farm without animals, I think, but we need to farm with a lot fewer of them and do it a lot more intelligently, I think. And
stop factory farming. We have to stop factory farming.
Well, yes, probably. There's a whole host of evidence that will tell you that factory farming, keeping animals intensively, is the most efficient way of getting protein from grain and soya, and actually it's even more efficient in terms of methane emissions per kilo of beef or chicken or pork or whatever. I'm a bit skeptical, but there is science that will support that argument. But I never quite know what they've included in their, what they're accounting for, whether it does, because a lot of the soya does come from South America. It's massively contributing to the loss of the Amazon rainforest, which is getting quite close to a tipping point of no return. So we just cannot be feeding our animals on imported grain, and which means that in particular, we are going to have to eat a hell of a lot less chicken and pork.
So that's very interesting. I want to talk to you now about what's going on with the world of farming certainly in the UK. I know that you're part of the groundswell movement, and when we left the EU, now I have a global audience, so you're going to have to forgive us on this one, but when we left the EU, you could see a benefit was that we would be leaving behind the common agricultural policy that proved to be pretty disastrous, really, didn't it?
Yes, I mean, I campaigned to remain, but one of the reasons I could say, as you say, one of the benefits was that the common agricultural policy throughout my farming career has been a disaster. Really, I mean, it hasn't been good for anything other than rich landowners. It hasn't been good for the purchaser of food, and it certainly hasn't been good for the environment. It hasn't been good for the taxpayer. I mean, I think it used to be, when we joined the EU, 50% of the budget went on paying landowners to destroy nature, essentially. I mean, maybe food was marginally cheaper, not a lot, than on the world market. So it was mostly just went into the. And then by the time we left, I think that it was still a third, I think, of the EU budget went to farmers in that way. It was just an area payment. You were paid so much per hectare, per acre. It was about 85 quid an hour, 100 quid an acre or something, when we left. And then, slowly emerged over a period of time, Michael Gove, first one at the head of DEFRA, this public money for public goods, and public goods included carbon sequestration, improving biodiversity, access to the land, maybe some sort of amenity things, and all that seemed perfectly good to me. The great problem with public money for public goods, in order to measure how much public money you get, you need to measure the public goods, and it seemed to take them about 4 years to really take on board what an issue that was, because if it was that easy, then we would have done it before. So it was that sort of arrogance that I have found really, really irritating in grasping that nettle. Because I mean, how do you value an earthworm compared to a kestrel, compared to clean water, and do it in a way that everyone's going to agree with and is going to be fair? I mean, it is a hell of a task, and I have an immense amount of sympathy, and I think a lot of good work goes on at DEFRA, but so over, I mean, how many years is it? Are we coming up for 2016? So we're coming up to 7 years now. Sorry, 6 years. My math's not very good. We've come up with this policy, and then Theresa May comes in, just tears it all up, or she gives every indication that she was, so we were emerging towards something that possibly was workable with the.
Hang on, no, it was still going under Theresa May, wasn't it? I thought it's only just been ripped up.
Oh, sorry, you're absolutely right. You called me up there. I mean, Liz Truss, yeah. Sorry, you're absolutely right. Thanks for pulling me up on that. Yeah. Under Theresa May, didn't change it. You're right. So it came until Liz Truss, and the argument, growth. The only way we're going to get growth is by deregulating everything. No doubt she had been lobbied by large landowners and the NFU. There were problems with Elms. Let's not say that it was a perfect solution. It was an emerging solution, painfully emerging after 6 and a bit years. And then to bloody tear it up and just throw it away and say we're going to go back to, the only benefit from my point of view, the EU. And my God, there've been plenty of problems. We didn't get back our fishing. If you go and look back around, in my particular area in the south, we didn't get back our fishing. And we ended up with an agricultural policy which is no better. In fact, I'd say it was worse, because the EU at least has moved towards more environmentally sustainable practice a bit since we left. So it's just a complete an utter cock up. I mean, it sounds now, now that Liz Truss has, has really, gone in all but name. And that I suspect, and there's been such an outrage from the RSPB, from the WWF, from English Nature, all the, these people, who many of whom are probably fairly committed Conservative voters, are so outraged that I think they're going to have to backpedal, and I think we probably will continue with arms. But not, you have to say, not if she had her way. It would have gone out of the window, yeah. And the whole idea, and the absolute, it's just so embedded in our government at the moment that the market can provide all the solutions, and therefore government just needs to back out. And that, is so completely absurd when it comes to agriculture. I mean, agriculture is 1.7% of GDP. It's 30% of, climate change emissions of climate change gases. And it's about 50% of the cause of biodiversity loss. So, the amount of GDP is not the issue. Our market, effectiveness is not what we should be talking about here. It should be led by biodiversity and its contribution to climate change. That should be what's shaping agriculture, not economic efficiency, because it's just not, we're such a tiny part of the economy. It's just not what we should be focusing on. It's just a result of a sort of ideological dogma, which I have to say, it's just been driving me up the wall for years. And I'm very relieved to find that, I hear more and more in the media that, just ideological dogma is not enough. And it brought Liz Truss down. Her ridiculous mini budget, which was just a bit of dogma, finally, there has to be a sort of reality and some intellectual rigor to what you're doing, which I think the Conservative Party, as we've seen over the last, since Boris got it, actually right back for the last 12 years, I would say, it's just been appalling, and I've just bloody well had enough of them.
I don't know if Labour will be any better, and you have to look at who's lobbying these governments, because we have to understand that they follow the money. It's about money, and they're very, very heavily lobbied.
Yes, Labour don't have a fantastic record on the environment, but I mean, I think they are changing and certainly making the right noises. I would love to see a liberal, Lib Dem Green Labour alliance running the country, preferably with Caroline Lucas at the head of it, but we're not going to get there, are we?
Have you ever thought about standing, Guy? I'd love you.
I actually have thought quite a lot over the last over the summer, actually. I've been, because I found myself so infuriated by this government, and particularly by our local MP, actually. One particular comment, it was actually Boris Johnson's, during COVID, the suggestion that that we'd done relatively well with developing vaccines was the result of greed and greed alone. I quote, those were his words for a vaccine developed in a publicly funded university, injected into us by the National Health Service, is aided by volunteers. That is just such an offensive thing to say. I was staggered that he even survived that. I mean, the idea that he thought that, A, that he actually believed it, and B, that he thought that was an acceptable thing to say. I mean, ever since then, I've been thinking I would do anything to get rid of this lot. And our local MP is a bloody idiot. So I would dearly love to unseat.
Oh my God, I really
But anyway,
hope.
And then I think I'm sorry, I just can't. Someone gave me Voltaire's Candide to read at the moment, which I'm reading at the moment. Anyway, the idea that you should cultivate your own garden. We certainly don't live in the best of all possible worlds, and I'm afraid it's not going to change in my lifetime. So my sort of personal philosophy is one of trying to lead a good life and influence those around me as far as I can. But I don't think I could. I think politics would destroy me. So no, I'm not going to go down that route.
Okay. I'd love you as agricultural minister, but what I don't get is there are brilliant people like you out there, and there are brilliant doctors like Dr. Aseem Malhotra and Dr. Sam White, who. Why are these people not advising the government? Why are they not talking to you? Why are you not on a select committee for the government on how we can change? I know that you do a lot of work, and I know you lobby, and talk to us about the groundswell movement, because I heard you talk recently, and you were saying that when you started, it was kind of like 350 farmers in a barn, and the conference this year in 2022, there were about 5,000 people there.
I think you've been poorly informed. Actually, this was the first year that I went to Groundswell, and I did very much enjoy going there. And I don't really know why I haven't been before. I think it was wonderful to watch such a broad. There were farmers from, and a hell of a lot of young farmers. But they weren't the kind of alternative farmers that you'd see at the Real Oxford Farming Conference, in January.
Oh no, it was the Oxford Farming Conference.
That's what you're talking about, is it? Okay. Yeah. 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 Groundswell is particularly about regenerative agriculture, which I I have some concerns about, though philosophically what they're trying to achieve and the direction of travel I'm wholly supportive of. There's some areas around it that do give me some concerns. And the Real Oxford Farming Conference was set up as an alternative to the Oxford Farming Conference, which I think even itself has improved greatly. And I think the last one was on the topic of soil health, for instance. So, God, you wouldn't have had that 10 years ago. I mean, it did used to be fairly sort of tweed wearing, very, very conservative. I think but anyway, in reaction to that, there was the real Oxford Farming Conference just up the road in the Oxford Town Hall, which now attracts many, many more delegates, and I think probably more journalists as well, and is a sort of coming together of people who are looking for change for an agriculture which is more focused on the needs of people, and I mean people, not just landowners, people in general, of nature, food quality, of biodiversity, of climate change, and yes, organic is part of it, but it's by far not all of it, and it's a very well, the best talks I think are the very practical ones that are looking about how do you grow a field of wheat without using glyphosate and without ploughing, and looking at growing through living mulches and things like that, and people comparing experiences of that, or agroforestry projects, or it's all, I go every year. Riverford helps support it financially. I think the people who run it are absolutely brilliant. 2 women now, and it is a fantastic conference.
It's good to know that there are people on the streets out there trying to change the world we live in, and there's a lot more people than I think most of my audience will realize. I'm part of the People's Food and Farming Alliance and the People's Health Alliance, and there are lots of organizations, and we're starting up, and I think everybody knows that we are heading to the 6th extinction unless we do something about this. And as I said earlier, Mother Nature is incredibly intelligent. When you were talking about the trees and how they feed the weaker trees around them, when I first saw kind of graphs of all the fungi under the ground. Have you seen that movie, Fantastic Fungi?
I haven't.
Oh, it's a cracker. You'll love it. But again, they come up with these things. I remember 15, 20 years ago, a scientist in a place called Didcot had come up with a fungi that they could tip into the oceans when there was an oil spillage, and it would eat the oil. And yet it's never been developed. It's all this stuff is possible, but it's just not developed.
Why aren't we why are we talking about fracking and digging up oil from the North Sea when we can solve our energy? The solutions are out there. We know we can do it with wind and solar and the storage and hydro, and the storage issues, which having to maintain the base load, which has been the great weakness of most renewables. There are the solutions available with our sort of hydrogen economy and so on to solve that as well. So I just don't. It's just to have a government that claims to be led by market forces in the market, which does stuff which I just don't understand why we would invest more in fossil fuels. I mean, it just seems completely crazy. And why we'd promise such a high price to people who were willing to build a nuclear reactor, but we can't offer the same price to someone who would provide, PV and wind, albeit with balancing technology to make sure that we do have the energy when we need it. It just seems completely bizarre, and I think you have to look at where how governments are lobbied. I think the answer to your question, and I do hope that a Labour government would be less susceptible to them. The absolute disgrace of the backdoor to number 10 during the COVID crisis was, which I don't know whether will ever be legally properly investigated.
I hope so.
But
I really hope so.
it was, there was very clearly a misuse of public money illegally, and there doesn't seem to be. I don't know whether there will ever be held to account for that. But anyway, I think the idea that the Conservative Party in particular is a safe pair of hands for spending our public money. I think the whole the COVID and the way our public money was spent then, just blows all that out of the water, really.
Absolutely. And I just want to come back to Liz Truss and her U-turns and backpedaling and everything, because I read very recently in the last week that she's putting a windfall energy tax on green energy. And yet one of the things that must be affecting farmers more than anything else at the moment is the sheer amount. There's no cap on the energy levels for storing your food, refrigeration, all of the kind of normal, what do you call it?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there. I think the idea that people who generate energy from solar and wind should be paid a price related to the gas price is absurd. I mean, so they must be just making an absolute killing now, and those people making a killing and will not be the farmers who have the PV in their field.
Oh no! I don't mean the farmers. I mean,
it'll be the people who have the contracts. Yeah. So, but I think I would absolutely support her that should be decoupled. It's been decoupled most places in Europe, and it should be done quickly. And they should be offered, payments which are more related to the cost of generating. And I'm, from what I read, I'm very confident that will be a hell of a lot less than generating it from a nuclear reactor.
No, I'm the windfall tax that they're putting on the green energy companies is actually charging them on the profits that they make, and yet she hasn't put a windfall tax on the fossil fuel industries, who are making a fortune at the moment.
Yeah, okay, that would be complete. If it was across the board and included the green energy, I wouldn't object to that. Obviously, if it just singles out the green energy, that would be.
Yeah, that's what I object to, and then you have to have a look and see where all the MPs have shares. What oil companies do they have shares in? And then you kind of go, yeah, well, that's why there's not a windfall tax going on the fossil fuels.
I think they are going to have to backpedal on that. I think my guess is that before this podcast goes out, you will find Jeremy Hunt will have installed a windfall tax on energy generators, but we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're at the end of our hour, and I just want to say a massive, massive thank you for coming on the podcast today. Thank you for the work that you do and for standing up for farmers, standing up for the health of our planet and for our health, which is, we are nature. We are a direct correlation of what we eat and what we absorb. And the work you do is fantastic. People can obviously find you on your website, which is www.riverfordfarms.
No, www.riverford.co.uk.
Oh, sorry.
But if you put in Riverford in any search engine, preferably not Google, then it'll come up. Yeah, and we deliver across the UK, well, across all of England and a little bit of the south of Wales. Yeah.
What would you say to people who aren't in the UK listening to this podcast? What advice would you give them to check out an organic veg box? What is the benefits of having an organic veg box that you can't get in a supermarket?
Well, you'll be eating more seasonal food, which as a result I think will taste better and almost certainly have a lower carbon and biodiversity footprint. and you'll be supporting someone who is doing things for the right reasons and trying to pioneer and show that there is a better way of farming and indeed living.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there are other farms, and if you can't find an organic veggie box, then just go along to a farmer's market and talk to the farmers, the growers there. And I used to do that, and I used to kind of say, what have you sprayed this week? Because sometimes they needed to spray, in their system, and they tell you, and then I just go, I won't have it that week. And I'd also say to them, what are you going to spray next week? Is there anything you think you might have to spray next week? And then if they were spraying it, I buy double the amount that day, so I didn't have to buy it for a couple of weeks. So there's lots of ways that we can, people think it is very, very expensive to eat organic, and the meat and stuff is expensive, but I heard you quote once a figure on the percentage that people spend on their food. And it's so tiny compared to their phone bill or their Wi-Fi or their Sky package, or, and yet without your body, you are nothing.
I mean, the price and food thing, it does. I mean, organic food is more expensive. I can't deny it. I mean, particularly organic meat. But the vegetables really aren't. I mean, I don't know, let's say our sort of medium fruit veg box might be 20 quid. If you went and bought the same stuff in a supermarket, it would certainly cost you 15 quid. Where's that fiver going? I mean, honestly, that's if you ever go to the pub, that's your first drink, isn't it? And you're talking about feeding your whole family as well. I don't know. The obsession with the price of food, I don't know why it dominates the conversation so much. I mean, we talk about food poverty. We should just be talking about poverty. I mean, most poor people are spending, 2, 3, 4 times as much on rent or a mortgage, more commonly rent, than they are on their food. Why are we never talking about that? And I suppose the other thing to always think about is that, food is typically 9-10% of GDP, gross domestic product, all our wages added together. 9 or 10% of it goes on food. I never quite know whether that includes eating out, but remember that the farmer is only getting less than 2% of that. It's about 1.6% of goes to food. It is at the farm gate. It is really very cheap already, and to be told that we need to produce it cheaper, I don't know. It just how do they want their food produced? It's quite infuriating, really, when there's so much focus is on food.
Yeah, I think that's a really good line to leave it on. It stops at the farmer's gate, and so support. I just want to say to everybody a massive shout out to Riverford Farms and to all the organic farmers out there who work tirelessly to keep our soil and us healthy. Guy Singh-Watson, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Philly, and good luck. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.